Hey everyone, so this week I'm not going to talk about one movie, but in fact, 5 of them. 5 of them that only have this most small connection ever, but weirdly tell their own strange story while you kind of look at them throughout the strange production history out of all 5 of the movies, mixed with the kind of timeline presented in them. Let's kind of get to it. First we gotta start off in 1976, in the first big mistake that Mattel ever made. That's right, we're talking about He-Man. Not that He-Man is a mistake, but that them going, nah, we don't want Star Wars toys, who cares about a weird space thing? And then Star Wars ended up being the biggest fucking thing of all time. They went, oh shit, oops. So of course they decided what could be the next thing. They literally threw everything out there and they eventually picked up on this Crazy Man's Strange Drawings, which eventually, when you change it up a little bit, became He-Man. Now, He-Man was a big success in the 80s, and it only kind of fizzled out at around the time right when Transformers was picking up. So, you know, it kind of a give in, give out on that started being less successful, thanks to people just kind of not wanting to focus on She-Ra, and not really caring about the Horde or the Snake Men as much, which is weird considering I love them more than, like, Trapjaw. But then again, I'm a big He-Man fan, so I kind of love all of the characters, even if they're really stupid. But, like, of course, the characters introduced in the movie. When it started being not as successful, Mattel ultimately signed a deal with Canon Film Groups. Now, what's important about Canon Film Group is that their movies suck. Their movies are so bad. The people behind Canon Film Group ultimately are the kinds of film company that take movies and they're just making them for mainly profit. And well, of course, they're making films to make money. When you make films, ultimately, you have to put some kind of idea in it. What's the point of art if it's not going to be challenging in even a slight capacity? So if it's nothing that's really worthwhile, why the fuck really care about it? Well, at least it's some kind of entertainment, right? Well, a lot of the time, a lot of Canon films ended up being so bad that they're not even entertaining. But some of them ended up being so bad they're good, so hey, they're at least remembered for that. And of course, Canon Film Groups did the biggest mistake they could ever do, and that of course is making not only the Masters of the Universe movie and then cutting it down to the point where it barely even was recognizable as He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, but also made fucking Superman 4 a couple years afterwards. Strangely though, right in the in-between, after just the failure of Masters of the Universe and the need to cut costs, they decided to just cut costs and just make a separate movie out of what was left. Out of not only what was going to be a second He-Man, which was clearly built up by the fact that Skeletor was alive by the end of it there, but also a possible Spider-Man? Yeah, that was going to happen, possibly. The first real Spider-Man movie, besides the ones mildly based after the TV show, was going to be by the same guys that made the incredibly bad Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo. That is actually who the fuck was going to make the first Spider-Man movie. Somewhere, canon was of course the reason for the movie Bloodsport, which sort of brought Jean-Claude Van Damme into the real face of pop culture in general. And it's not like it was the only thing, well, you know, it helped out a lot. And Jean-Claude Van Damme was very thankful for this fact, and it's the reason he promised to come back for another film. And that film ended up being the one I started to mention, that the whole mixing of the leftover of He-Man, and that came Cyborg. Cyborg is just kind of Jean-Claude Van Damme helping this woman who he just happens to meet out one day after she tries to kill him and he doesn't kill her. They go off and try to help a cyborg, the titular cyborg, who is off to try and cure the plague. Now, that's the weird thing about Cyborg, is it happens in the future, where apparently it's a Mad Max-esque thing where the world is very much fucked up, but that's not like it's a nuclear apocalypse, but like the world is still fucked up, you know? People are wearing dumb costumes that no one would wear unless it's the apocalypse, so there you go. And for whatever reason, the last bastion of humanity is sending off a cyborg, which is, in this movie and this movie alone, what actually a cyborg is, was a human given robotic parts, which is what a cyborg is, by the way. And of course, to somehow find the cure for this plague that was the real reason for the real downfall of humanity. Now, of course, Jean-Claude finds this, decides to not go with her, and again meets the girl, and they go off to try and find them. Only because the cyborg is kidnapped by this dumb guy who had apparently, as we see in flashback throughout the entirety of the movie, attacked his family, which he kind of just met right when the world was beginning to end. Now, the entire movie is this very slow-paced movie that is almost so boring that it will put you to sleep. And anytime the action shows up, it's also in slow motion. Why put slow motion in every action scene? Every part of every action scene, slow motion, and it's just like, what was the decision here? Now, of course, this mainly comes from the bad directing style of Albert Pyun. Albert Pyun were very well known for having these kinds of movies. Watch literally any of the Nemesis movies, which is a film series I made to also talk about one day, just due to the fact that it exists. Albert Pyun is, of course, very important in this tale, but we'll talk about him a little bit later, as ultimately Cyborg made for $500,000 actually did very well, considering it promoted itself shortly after Bloodsport with JCVD, so you might as well, and of course, you know, there you go. And it was a pretty good time for the company, but again, as we know, later by 1995, they just kind of ceased to exist. Maybe you shouldn't have made stuff like Cyborg. Now, eventually by 1989, the company was not at all doing well, before being bought up by Giancarlo Peretti, who ultimately sort of reorganized the whole company into something worse. Eventually, by 1996, the whole ship went down, and hey, Peretti was indicted of perjury, which is a real thing that happened. That's the thing about Cannon Film Groups, is that though its cost-cutting did help for stuff like Cyborg, it eventually caught up with them, and it did not do well. And when you have the wrong people, like I mentioned Peretti before, in charge of your company, you're eventually gonna go down under. So of course, who would gain the rights other than, I don't know, but whoever bought the rights gave the license to Trimark Pictures, a company that is almost exactly like Cannon. Trimark was founded in 1984 and of course has made most of the Leprechaun movies, the two Dentist movies, and one of my favorites, dumb B movies, Faust. So it's got quite the repertoire of dumb 80s, late 90s movies that just are not good, but you love them because they're stupid. So who else could make a sequel to a bad movie made by a company that specifically makes bad movies because they don't make great decisions, but a company that does the exact same thing? Though lasting longer than Cannon, they, very similar to Cannon, would eventually go out of business in 2001, eventually being bought up by, yes, Lionsgate. So that's probably who owns the Cyborg rights now, I think? But that's unimportant. Point being, though, Trimark did make a sequel to Cyborg. With a bigger budget, it's technically a better-looking movie. It's a movie that has some pretty cool-looking backgrounds that make it seem more like something like Blade Runner. And it's clear that that was the inspiration, considering now there is rich corporations that are trying to take each other down, and cyborgs in this are not cyborgs, they're androids, and they'll be that way for the rest of these movies. Cyborg 2 stars this guy who teaches cyborgs to fight who looks a lot like a certain other actor, at least during here, and of course the person he mainly has taught is fucking played by Angelina Jolie in her second ever movie. Isn't that weird? And it's not the last weird actor we'll see in this, but point being, Angelina Jolie is probably the only good acting in this film, but also still not good at all. Neither is literally anyone. The movie is about this one American question mark company called Pinwheel that's trying to send Angelina Jolie to this Japanese question mark company called Kobayashi, which I wonder if it's named that for the reason I think it is, but it also might just be what sounds Japanese? I don't know, Kobayashi, whatever. Might as well have called it fucking Honda, you dumb motherfuckers. But whatever. Quite the stupid name. The even more stupider thing is they're helped by a cyborg who can just tune into any and every TV ever. And this is how he communicates with them and helps them escape because they don't want to be used as a suicide bomb robot thing. So here you go. And who else do they run to but Kobayashi? And it's almost like, what was the point? What was the point here? Oh, but they are hunted down by this weird cowboy man, and also a separate hunter who was also sent by Pinwheel, I think? But then they end up fighting, and that's the reason why our main characters are able to quickly take them down. And keep in mind, that's only after an hour and a half of the movie of nothing happening and a bad romance forming that is the least believable romance I've seen in a movie ever. And I've seen some bad romance movies in my lifetime, or at least bad romance subplots, and boy, was there absolutely nothing here. Funnily enough, they actually capture the guy controlling the TVs, and he's just like, haha, but they've escaped. And then the main guy of Pinwheel's like, haha, but we can basically blow her up whenever we want, and it's like a big-ass bomb. And then right when he does it, the main guy, the TV guy's like, haha, I took the bomb off screen. And that just blows up all of Pinwheel. Which, of course, considering that they were controlling the city that they were in, means they just kind of, you know, nuked one of these only leftover bastions of humanity. Thanks? Strangely enough, though, Trimark wouldn't be the reason for Cyborg 3, The Recycler. Made in 1994, it was made by a couple that apparently really liked the Cyborg movies, because they made a production company specifically to make this. And the people who were behind this would eventually make some Bloodsport sequels, alongside, I'm assumedly, their friend's production company. And they weirdly got help by another production company in order to make this at all, which is the same production company that helps make several indie films at this time. That was kind of the whole point there. Media 8 production, known for Santa Slay and Media Days, which their very last film being the Eileen Woodrow story Monster in 2003, tried their best to try and get as much indie productions off ground as possible. And though that's an interesting prospect, it ended up being not a lot of good movies. But at the very least, it ended up helping vaguely enough to, you know, help make Cyborg 3. Funnily enough, though, I think they were only able to get with this production because they decided to, I think, contact the director of the second one and get him on board. And because the writers of the second one, which at this point were writing with the live-action Jungle Book movies, the original ones, and that had Media 8 in some way. That's how it's all kind of connected, if that makes sense. I think they got the director, talked to the writers who were working with the company, and they gained their help because of the connection there, is what I'm saying here. I have no proof of that, but, you know, cool. Also, besides the Jungle Book and stuff, there's nothing notable about any of the writers of these other two movies. The writer of this one, besides helping for this make this movie, made another movie by the couple that made this movie. So it's mainly, strangely, a passion project of a determined couple, I think couple. It's weirdly a passion project made by a couple of people that weirdly liked these bad B movies. And hey, it's strangely the best out of the group. Cyborg 3 has Angelina Jolie's character, no longer played by Angelina Jolie, suddenly pregnant with a robot baby. We find out later it's a capsule inside her that apparently stored and controlled the semen that I'm assuming happened at some point. And keep in mind, the timeline of this movie is very weird. At the beginning she mentions that the whole relationship between humans and cyborgs is what went all the way down, and now humans are just on the hunt for cyborgs. Again, cyborgs, they're really just androids. And that's kind of the whole thing there, is now the world is slowly going more and more down the shitter because of the big companies slowly being destroyed over the last couple of years. But for this to be 200, for, you know, maybe the, like, 2000s of, like, now a time of, like, and because I think Cyborg happens in, like, 2020. An alternate version of the 2000s. And, of course, this makes sense because Cyborg 2 happens in 2074. But for 2074, shortly after it to be 200, this would require that, like really early 1900s is when cyborg technology began to exist. And I feel like that's probably not correct, which would then lead this to be 2220, which would make the opening scene of her visiting a doctor, because, again, she's pregnant suddenly, to be weird that she mentions her husband, again, the other guy at the end of the second movie, of like, where did he go? And it's just like, oh, he's dead, and he's been dead for like 100-some years now. Why are you mentioning this? So the timeline is just weird no matter what. The point is, at least 80-something years after 2074, which I'm just going to go with my 2220 year thing, suddenly she's pregnant and needs to find one of the many developers that's been out hiding, hating the fact that they've made cyborgs. And they fuck around for a little bit as hunters end up trying to attack them. They're called the Recyclers, and they quickly kill the main reason I really wanted to watch this movie, which is Malcolm McDowell. Malcolm McDowell's in this movie for a whole, 5 minutes before he's killed by the actual main villain. God, I wish Malcolm McDowell was the real main villain of this movie, because I love Malcolm McDowell. One of my favorite actors just due to the fact of how just weird he gets and just the fact that he keeps getting in weird roles like this. But, strangely enough, the person that's on the, main poster that's on Wikipedia that you can find is not a major part of the movie. Okay, cool. Eventually, though, the two people escaping the hunters find this safe haven of cyborgs, which is, behind this weird, non-cyborg tech-destroying bubble. That right in the middle of it, the one main recycler's big boy android ends up kind of destroying, and then walking out of there with the main character. Her name is Cash, by the way. It's a weird name, but Cash and her baby end up just being oh, but you're a cool dude, right? You know, why are you trying to fight people? And they also sort of look into his mind, which ends up revealing that, yeah, it's probably 2220 because it mentions the year 2198 or whatever the hell. I don't know. There's no point in focusing on the timeline. Pointing to a dumb, goofy thing where she ends up escaping, and with help of the broken cyborgs that are in this neat little town, they end up having this goofy, dumb fight scene, which I swear the music in it is the exact same tune as the main theme of the Hercules TV show. I swear it. And they end up fighting off the Recyclers and making a cool safe haven for cyborgs. But specifically, this cool, weird, mutant cyborg human baby that will end up maybe helping the world heal? Probably not, though. Remember Albert Pyun? Well, while he was making his own films, those cyborg films were made, so he decided he wanted to make his own version of a cyborg sequel, to continue his idea of a storyline of what the world would be like after the events of Cyborg. Now, it's in no way directly connected to the others, but this is Albert Pyun's idea of what the world would be like, and personally, I think it can perfectly connect. I think, weirdly, that his sequel strangely involves cyborgs now taking over the world, mainly now hunting humans, it could actively be after. Now I think after maybe a generation or two of things being cool, the mentioned city where the cyborgs, still called cyborgs by the way, of Albert Pyun's own movie called Knights, where they come from, Genesis, I think is that haven at the end of 3, and the faceless, masked guy, the master builder, ended up being some guy who was very similar to the guy from 3 who helped make the cyborgs originally. And he decides that he's going to build this army of humans and cyborgs to start the big nuclear apocalypse that we'll talk about in a bit. But that's sort of the plan, that the main villain of this is making the secondary villain, played by Lance Hendrickson. Yes, that Lance Hendrickson from Aliens. I don't know. I have no idea how they got him. I have no idea. Nor can you, barely know that it's him. All this dumb shit they have on him. He's got a big robot arm. What's going on? I don't know. But point is, whoever was at Genesis made Gabriel, this cyborg that's made to kill other cyborgs, who basically sucks so bad at it that he gets cut in half. However, before he's able to do so, he trains this random girl, played by a real MMA fighter, to help him fight these cyborgs. She ends up infiltrating this group that the cyborgs sort of took over to basically help them gain fuel, which, yeah, they're vampires in this movie, by the way. They kidnap humans and hunt them for their blood. Yeah. But she's able to sort of get the upper hand and get the lower half of Gabriel, and the two of them, now that he's fixed, are able to defeat them. And the movie just ends with them now needing to go off and find the Master Builder now they've beaten the main villain. This is another hour and 40 minutes of nothing happening, and most of it all happening by the end. I don't like the idea that I could easily describe a movie in barely the time that it takes to watch it. Now, while the idea was funny at first that the cyborgs had this cool, good ending at the end, ended up being corrupted by this evil builder man to now become vampires. It just didn't really do anything with that, and then didn't expand its world on its own. In fact, if it wasn't only told to me elsewhere, I wouldn't have thought this was connected to anything else, and I would think it's even worse than it is. However, due to only being vaguely connected to Cyborg, I can sort of make it more entertaining by just making up my own fan theories about it. And when, as I say, sometimes here and there, when I have to explain your movie, that means you did a bad job, and your movie's probably a bad fucking movie, Albert. And yes, Albert Pion is producer, writer, and director of these movies with help of Moonstone Pictures, at least for this one. He has a lot of connections in the industry, which allows him to, in many different ways, get other smaller studios like Moonstone to help him out in these sorts of things. Moonstone, sort of thankfully, is a production company still making movies, and is not Full Moon Pictures, the people who made Evil Bong and Ginger Dead Man, though I swear for a second I thought that they were. They are, however, the people who did make the Jack Frost movies, so I could talk about that for a second, and then forget it exists again, till the next time I think about that gross fucking bath scene. That's back in my head now. But anyway, this movie, while stupid as all hell, was not the last movie Albert Pion ever made, but it's doubling out the last time he ever continued the sort of vague cyborg trilogy he continued. Strangely, the idea of cyborgs fighting against humans continued in Omega Doom, the weirdest named movie, especially when you know that the main character's name is Omega Doom. Okay. And to make it worse, Omega Doom is played by fucking Rutger Hauer. Yes, that Rutger Hauer. Because the people behind Cyborg 2 think about Blade Runner, but so did Albert Pion. Even if not on purpose, he clearly did this. I mean, he had, again, Lance Henriksen in the last one, so he clearly knows science fiction, so yeah, this was done on purpose. However, weirdly, while the most interesting thing I found about this movie is its beginning. It's post a nuclear apocalypse. It's, I think, clear that even if not on purpose, this happens directly after the Master Builder ended up getting away, making the army he wanted to make in the first place, and then ended up having him fight against the last bastion of humanity, and humanity failed, with the only real survivors being the cyborgs and the humans who went underground, mentioned by this movie. It's clear he probably didn't survive, but at least cyborgs did, and now they're off kind of doing whatever. They've built themselves into gangs, so at this point I think this is like 2,300 something or whatever, I don't know, but this is so far away from like now at time, so if you think the world's ending, just keep in mind it won't happen for another like 300, 400 years. However, we will have a robot uprising, and some of them will be vampires, so, you know, look on the bright side. Strangely though, Omega Doom is the worst out of all of the movies, being literally just Rutger Hauer talking shit to two robot gangs, first on his own to his weird guy who loses his head, and Omega Doom helps like connect back to a random body, and then talk shit with the other gangs to the gangs themselves, before eventually fighting like a couple of their members, and then apparently that's enough that he won. He's beaten them, and now this random lady in a not really bar rules this section? Okay. And the weirdest part about the movie is maybe it throws shade at Cyborgs 2 and 3 by mentioning at the end that there's apparently someone as strong as Omega Doom who is mentioned as a hybrid, and it's like, what does that mean? Is this a random thing that was meant to set up another movie Albert was never going to follow up? Is it a reference to his Nemesis movies, also about weird robots? Or is it like a reference to the hybrid human cyborg thing from the other movies? Are these movies happening parallel, or are they happening the way I think it is, which is 3 results in the weird vampires and then Omega Doom? Or is it like, somehow this is happening in one half of the world, and the other half of the world is 2 and 3. I have no clue. The point is, I think somehow these are all weirdly connected, even if not on purpose. Makes this the weirdest franchise that's ever existed, to me at least. The fact that this goes in such a weird way, and it connects into a bunch of different aspects of Hollywood that you never even realized it did. People that you know from big things were in this, and you still have never heard of this stuff. So that's the reason I wanted to really bring this up. This is a weird, dumb, just unknown franchise that has just the strangest connections, and is a good case of why I like to look into sequels. To understand how things got this way, and how people just went, I'm gonna make this weird thing, and how it adds to this world if you really just like connect it on your own. It's this strange journey that, despite none of these movies being good or enjoyable in any way, was kind of worth it, just to sort of like make my own story out of all these things, you know? And yes, of course, that story that I make in my head is very much what is needed for these movies. Suffice it to say, these are not the best movies ever made. Not only was the first one made by a company that clearly didn't give a shit, but it was made by a director that didn't really do that great of work in general. Albert Pyun is just kind of not that great of a director or a writer. Nothing he's really made has been that great, and a lot of his directing not only is just kind of very flat and boring, just having no real thought behind it. It feels like Albert Pyun, while wants to make a good film, doesn't really have any idea how to, if that makes sense. Nothing against the man, but he can't make a good movie, and God knows that is involved here with Cyborgs 1 and then 2 and 3, with the actual 2 and 3, at least the official ones, not being that good either. The director there hasn't made anything good after these movies or before these movies, so it's not like it's really worth talking about. And as I mentioned, nothing worth talking about the other writers of 2 and 3. So it's almost like no one here had any idea of how to make a movie, from production studio to director to writer. And while I'm not to disrespect all the people who clearly put a lot of work into these films, especially in terms of like costume design and stunt work, any design work or any good acting in any capacity is just kind of thrown away by the directing and writing just being so bad, especially when it comes to Omega Doom. And I could say that 2 and Nights are just incredibly awful, and some of the worst films I've ever seen, but Omega Doom may be absolutely up there with just like the top 5 movies that are the worst I've ever seen in my life. And I've seen a lot of movies. I've seen a lot of movies in my life. I've seen a lot of bad movies in my life that feel like something that was just made shoddily out of nowhere with absolutely nothing and no thought to it. But Omega Doom, my god. He just, again, just walks around and talks shit to 2 robot gangs, and then they die. The end. There's nothing there. But despite these movies being incredibly terrible, I would actually recommend watching them, but only in the they're so good they're bad sort of marathon. Especially 3. There is weirdly something enjoyable and likable and almost charming about 3, but I kind of would recommend you watching it on its own, and maybe just making up your own story for the whole Cyborg series in general. But besides that, and maybe Cyborg 1, which people have a weird fondness for, you could probably skip all these movies, unless you're just kind of doing it for the same reason I was doing it, which is diving down the rabbit hole of the weird production history of this sort of vague franchise that exists. But of course, whether or not you want to watch these, I would definitely love to learn your opinions about these movies. So it would be cool if you could leave that stuff in the comments. And if you'd like this video and you want to see other different movie reviews of other single or whole series, then go ahead and subscribe to my channel. I have lots of stuff like that. And most importantly, stay good, stay safe, and never trust robots. I swear to God, just like multiple times I've talked about it, they will start an uprising. I am not wrong. I don't care if this dates me when it comes to the point of robots gaining sentience. I will never trust robots. End of story. And that's how I'm ending that.